So let's talk about the construction of the Constitution. Article 1 is the congressional branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Article 4 is the relations with the states. Article 5 is how to amend the Constitution. Article 6, general provisions. Article 7 is the Establishment Clause and the Attestation Clause, which actually links the Constitution with the birth of Christ and the Declaration of Independence. Now, this wasn't an accident, the way they laid these things out. Everything they did had a purpose. And look what's first. The Congress, then the executive, then the judicial. We're going to go through these. The first three articles form the separation of powers. The legislative authority of Congress, the executive authority of the President, and the judicial authority. Article 1, the legislative branch. Our founders did not do anything by accident. That's why Congress is covered first. They have all the legislative power to pass laws, set public policy, control spending, declare war, regulate commerce, and many other important functions. The House of Representatives are the closest to the people, and they're replaced every 2 years. That's why they've been given so much power. It's a whole lot easier to contact your representative that might be your next door neighbor. You never know, he lives close to you, rather than maybe a senator that could be anywhere in the state or somebody up in the federal government. Article 2, the executive branch, includes the various executive branches under the presidential control. It's important to remember that only the Congress can legislate, set public policy, and control spending. The President cannot do these things through presidential directives or presidential orders. Presidential directives and orders aren't even listed as a power in the Constitution. What they are, they're tools that an executive uses to implement the things he's required to do, like implementing the law, not making law, through these presidential directives and orders. We'll get into that a little more deeply too here in a minute. The President is charged with implementing the law and regulations passed by Congress, appointing judges, various department heads, secretaries, ambassadors, and so forth, but only as the Senate confers with that. Serving as Commander-in-Chief of the military, negotiating treaties with foreign countries. And again, these treaties have to be approved by the Senate. So there's a check and balance there, just like there are in the appointments that he makes to judges and secretaries and so forth. Article 3, the judicial branch. The judicial power is vested in SCOTUS, which stands for the Supreme Court of the United States, and in such inferior courts as Congress establishes. So the Constitution only established the Supreme Court, and then Congress established all the lower courts. The judicial power consists in the authority to, number one, discover the purpose of the law according to the intent of the lawgiver, and then to apply the law according to the facts of the case or dispute in order to render a proper legal opinion or judgment. Folks, the only thing a judge has is judgment. He doesn't have either the purse or the sword, merely judgment. But folks, they do so many things where they actually make law. They spend money. Remember, I don't know if you remember the busing system. I'm old enough where I remember busing in the 60s. I grew up in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I've seen so many changes in our country. But back in the 60s, when we had the busing in the schools, the judge said, well, you school over here, you got to buy these buses, and you got to take these kids over here. Folks, that was spending money and requiring legislation. The judges had no authority to do that. Congress should have done that through legislation, not the judicial branch. In the U.S. Supreme Court case, Valley versus Northern Fire, it's a good case showing the limits of judicial authority. In there they said courts are constituted by authority and they cannot go beyond the power delegated to them. If they act beyond that authority, which we just talked about, and certainly in contravention of it, their judgments and orders are regarded as nullities. They're not voidable, but simply void, and this even prior to reversal. Isn't that interesting? So if you do something unconstitutional, and I think this holds true for Congress too. When Congress, and we talk about that in a minute, when Congress passes a law that's unconstitutional, it should be void on its face. It shouldn't even have to go to the Supreme Court. Checks and balances. This is another important feature of our country. Checks and balances are just as important as the separation of powers. Both of these are designed to protect us from the usurpation of powers outside of the constitutional restraints of jurisdiction, and in turn prevent the corruptions that led to failures of past republics and democracies. We are not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. Remember, we gave you a good little analogy of that a little while ago with the 3 wolves and the 2 sheep. Constitutional republic is important to remember. That's what we're not a democracy.